I'd like to talk a little bit today about compromised liberties. This is going to be focused within Homeland Security, terrorism, acts of evil, um, and the effects on the Americans' constitutional rights. First Amendment, Fourth Amendment will be discussed. Just type the, I guess, the opposite view of what happens with the American people when they're victims. They're almost punished to a sort when we reflect back on not just the pain that's caused by acts of evil, but as well as the goals of these organizations to disrupt our lives.
This is other jet drone. This is other jet drone. Holy fuck!
Jesus fucking Christ! Chris, are you
Don't touch it.
Oh my God!
Now, obviously, the effects of 9/11 are pretty fresh in most of our memories. I know I recall it pretty well when I was at work, and everybody stopped working. We were all glued to a TV screen or radio, trying to fully understand what just happened on that morning. The results, obviously, we're still dealing with today with, in this particular case, 9/11, or post 9/11 with Patriot Act, as well as other changes in laws and how that's affected us. A little acronym called RATCH, which focuses on some of the things that I've discussed. We'll begin with RATCH, with radicals, anarchists, terrorists, and crimes of hate. With all these 4 items here that are addressed, take a look at how the radicals have caused serious acts throughout our history. Again, it's not just current day terrorism and how it's affected us. Anarchists, some of their goals and minds that they have to disrupt peace or to physically to change a government. Obviously, terrorists. Throughout this coursework, we've learned about some of the originators of terrorists early in our history, in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, up to the current status, as well as crimes of hate. If we take a look at all these and wrap them all together, their bottom line is they all cause a lot of pain, death, destruction, either because they want to change how we operate politically, they want to change how we live our lives, the freedoms that we act, as well as there's one other one that I really didn't include here, but in times of war, there's been a lot of changes as well, which will be addressed in the next couple of slides. The penalties of freedom. Now, when we take a look at penalties of freedom, it's the challenges that we face when our government makes policy changes or legislative changes that address the freedoms that we enjoy today. Some of the early acts, let me back up one, there we go. Early acts was the Sedation Act of 1798. The just pretty much new one to our nation's freedom. The Sedation Act of 1798 affected a lot of people. That was all focused around the threat of going to war with France. Never happened, although the threat was there. The Sedation Acts of 1918 have to do with changes with our liberties in the World War I era. Sedation Acts of 1941, which were focused on, obviously, World War II era after bombing Pearl Harbor. And then what we're all pretty familiar with today is the Patriot Act, where some claim the First and Fourth Amendments have been affected. Going back to 1798, look at President Adams, who was our second president. The Sedation Acts jailed newspaper editors. There were approximately 20 that were jailed for sedation. A United States representative was placed in prison, as well as he had so much support though from his voters that he was actually reelected while serving time. As well as the act attempted to limit the voting rights of legal immigration. During this era in 1798, the threat on some of the former British citizens that were now citizens of the newly formed America were threatened through some of the other immigrants, German immigrants, Irish, and so on and so forth. And they were concerned that they were going to elect officials that thought differently than they did, pretty much a different political organization. And so with the how they limited the voting rights and how they're trying to attempt was, at the time, you had to have been a legal immigrant in the United States for 5 years. They attempted to change that to 14 years to stop certain people from being elected. 1918, President Wilson was obviously in power. We were entering World War I. The case that actually went to the Supreme Court was Debs versus the United States, which I'll touch base with in just a minute. And during that, there were 877 citizens were arrested and convicted for acts of sedation. A lot of this, they pretty much, if you didn't support the war, if you spoke out against the war, you could be tried and convicted, which many, obviously, people were. If we take a look at Debs versus the United States, it happened in Missouri, and Debs was outspoken against the war. He was against the war, he was against the draft, and he spoke publicly about it on numerous occasions because of his thoughts that we should not be in the war, that there should not be a draft. He was arrested and convicted of sedation. Again, went to the Supreme Court. They upheld that decision. Again, clearly a First Amendment violation.
When he was struggling to keep the country neutral, Wilson had lamented the suspension of civil liberties during the Civil War. War means autocracy, he had warned. To fight, you must be brutal and ruthless. Now America was at war once more, and Wilson declared, "Woe to the man who seeks to stand in our way."
Wilson's fears about the disloyalty of many elements of American society, particularly recent immigrants, all came rather nastily to the fore almost immediately after the declaration of war, and he allows his Attorney General to undertake some very aggressive prosecutions of the ethnic and immigrant press, to search out and suppress any dissident views about the waging of the war. It's not a lovely chapter in the history of American civil liberties.
The Wilson administration began urging American citizens to act as vigilantes and report anyone who spreads pessimistic stories, cries for peace, or belittles our effort to win the war. From concert halls to schools, Beethoven and Brahms, along with all works of German literature, were banned. In Chicago, school children were enlisted to publicize the decree. In addition, thousands of Americans were arrested for opposing the war on moral and ethical grounds. One of them was Eugene Debs, four-time socialist candidate for president. After Debs made a speech against the war, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
The Wilson administration supported and passed an Espionage Act and later a Sedition Act, both of which limited free speech in this country. Under the provisions of that act, the Wilson administration could arrest anyone that spoke out against the war, anyone who spoke out against Wilson's policies, anyone who spoke out against conscription.
1941, President Roosevelt had been the president for a number of years. World War II, entered the war obviously after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. In 1938, President Roosevelt was quoted as, "If the fires of freedom and civil liberties burn low in other lands, they must be made brighter in our own," pretty much stating that we should be the most freest nation in the world. It says here 7 years. It was a couple years later. Japanese, Italian, German immigrants are collected up and placed in internment camps. It wasn't just immigrants, it was also second and third generation Japanese, Italian, Germans. They may have been here for families 100 years. Just because of their ancestry, they were all rounded up and placed in internment camps. Japanese alone, there were 110,000 Japanese immigrants and or Japanese descent Americans that were placed in internment camps during this period. It's a black eye in that era. By 1945, they were released, although a lot of them lost everything. They had to leave their homes. Weren't allowed to bring anything other than what they could carry. So definitely a black eye in our nation's history, and clearly a strong violation of their civil liberties.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
We were shocked to realize that the president had signed this. We just kept saying, but we live out in the valley, not on the west coast, not near an airport or a naval base. Surely, they wouldn't think that we needed to move too, because we were busy raising strawberries and harvesting crops that would really help our nation. We couldn't believe that they would need all of us to quit our work, to produce our food for victory, and then be put away. We just figured they were sending us up in the mountains somewhere, to be. And so I started to gather rice, small sacks of rice, and collected the packages of dehydrated soup and jello and things that were light, so that they wouldn't be such a heavy baggage for us to carry, because they said you could only take what you carry. And we knew we had to take blankets and sheets and bedding and things, as well as some of our clothes. We had no idea whether we were going to a hot place or a cold place, so our family was quite concerned about how to get ready.
Now, people of our era, we've obviously dealt with the Patriot Act. A lot of people believe it should be in place, and probably equally amount of people do not believe it should be in place. Senator Ron Paul was and still actually is very opposed to it, along with many other people. It's some people say it affects their constitutional rights. Some people say, well, it may do that, but in the same token, it's helps capture or neutralize possible attacks on our nation. Signed into law by President George W. Bush. Obviously was put into place post 9/11. quite kind of ironic because for the signs of the bill that it is and the language that's in it, it was introduced, simply days after the attacks in 9/11. So many people, including myself, believe that that was a pre-drafted document that was looking for an opportunity possibly to enact it. And 9/11 obviously prompted that opportunity. Because of warrantless wiretaps can all be conducted by certain people in law enforcement agencies, not focused so much on you or I, but there are individuals that can be wiretapped. As an example, if someone is of Middle Eastern descent and if they speak to their family at home over time and enough conversations, the government may decide to tap that phone line, and in doing so breach their Fourth Amendment rights. Not only the Fourth Amendment, but the First Amendment. If someone's very outspoken against the actions of some, it's very possible that the Patriot Act may open up opportunities for the government. Patriot Act is somewhat different than the Sedition Acts that I spoke about previously. Obviously, if you take a look and consider back to, let's take a look at World War I, people who spoke out against the war, they would be detained and charged with sedition. It'd be hard to imagine the amount of people that would be detained and arrested today that spoke out against the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. I don't think they could build jails large enough to hold them. So obviously the First Amendment right, I don't believe has been respected as strongly as the Fourth Amendment with the Patriot Act, although the opportunity does exist.
But once again, they play on fears and innuendos and try to scare the people. After 9/11, of course, we had to go after the bad guys. And I voted to go after the bad guys, to go after the Al-Qaeda that was responsible. But look, it took over 10 years to get hold of bin Laden. At the same time, they took 10 years to invade countries they were just itching to invade in and occupy. They used it as an excuse. But what about what they did what the Congress and the President did to the American people? The American people weren't guilty, but what has happened? They went and immediately passed the Patriot Act, which undermines your liberties. The Patriot Act is one thing for certain. It is not patriotic. So the best thing we can do with the Patriot Act is repeal it as quickly as possible. I was convinced that if he had a different name on the Patriot Act, if that it had to repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, nobody would have voted for it. So instead of saying we're going to repeal the Patriot Act, how about restore the Fourth Amendment to the American people?
Allowing rats to win. Are we as a nation allowing rats to win when we limit the civil liberties of the American citizens, along with at times of war? If we reflect back on some of the things I've discussed, we've taken a look how the actions of others, primarily most of which have been outside of our nation, have affected us within our nation with our civil liberties. The loss or change of the Fourth Amendment with the Patriot Act, the Sedition Act, and the attack on the First Amendment rights are clearly factual. So with that, I would open the floor to any questions that you have. I encourage you to come to your own conclusions on this, as well as always focus on what our forefathers designed our Constitution for. I, for one, do not want to lose any of my civil liberties because of the actions of others.